announced late last night that Dave Clawson would be stepping down as Wake Forest head coach. Been there 11 seasons, overall record of 69 and 67 and 69, 7 bowl game appearances, 5 out of 11 of Wake Forest's bowl game wins were under Dave Clawson, and arguably the most successful head coach at Wake Forest in the modern era, unless you want to debate between him and Jim Grobe. But what fascinates me about this Wake Forest program is just the pillar of consistency that they've had over the years. Since 1993, they've only had 3 head coaches, and granted, Jim Caldwell, obviously he was 26 and 63, so we don't necessarily have to talk about that part of it. But Jim Grobe and Dave Clawson are so well respected within the state of North Carolina. I mean, you go back and you think about Jim Grobe. He was a 2006 AP Coach of the Year, led them to an 11-2 season. So it goes to show that, yes, that you can win at academically prestigious schools. And the one commonality between Jim Grobe, Jim Caldwell, and Dave Clawson that you can all say is the model for success there is all relatively similar, in the sense of the model for success that they have is being able to recruit, particularly within the state of North Carolina, developing players, and starting upperclassmen. And when you have that sort of model, I think one thing that's always evident is, well, they're program builders in the sense of, hey, in order for me to implement this program, I legitimately need four or five, even 6 seasons to really get the ball rolling and getting this program heading in the right direction too. And what people don't remember too is a lot of the time Dave Clawson turned down numerous different head coaching jobs to stay at Wake Forest just because of how much he loved the program there. And back in 21 and 22, when he had Sam Hartman, he definitely had a lot of success too. And it definitely maybe was sort of the example for him, where he said to himself, hey, college football is changing in a direction that I don't necessarily think I can keep up with anymore. Because I'm sure, when he really began coaching back in 1999 with Fordham and Richmond and Bowling Green, that program builder mentality was essentially what everybody had to do. I mean, granted, you did have a couple transfers coming in, but for the most part too, these transfers that are coming in are typically freshmen or sophomore going into their junior year, because you had to sit out for a whole year. And now in this new day and age of NIL and the transfer portal and all that stuff, in many ways it makes it really difficult for Dave Clawson's model to work in this day and age of college football. And I think he's hinted at this frustration a couple times now. I don't think he's necessarily sat there and ever resented Sam Hartman for leaving for Notre Dame, because I think he understands, like, hey, if kids are being offered hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, who wouldn't jump on that, especially if you know that they're not going to play in the NFL. So I think that's one part of it too. But I think if you're Clawson too, you say to yourself, man, you spent all this time developing all these players for your program, and then they turn around and just leave for money, essentially, which I'm sure has to be deflating in some regard. I mean, you look at their past couple of seasons, and Wake Forest has gone 4-8 the past 2 seasons, and North Carolina is definitely an underrated place to be able to recruit to. I mean, there is definitely a hotbed of talent there, so it's not so much that, but at the same time, it is a very competitive place to recruit in general. And when you have the academic part of it, and when you have an NIL budget that ultimately probably won't really be developed anytime soon, but at the same time, I think what people don't realize too is Wake Forest has been notoriously patient with their head coaches. I think they do actually give you a lot of support a lot of the time, and I think they look for a specific type of coach to be able to develop, recruit, starting the upperclassmen, and really make sure that you fit the identity and the mold of the team too. That's the one thing I think Wake Forest values that's different from other programs in the country is if you go back and you look, a lot of the coaches that they've hired have some sort of affiliation or connection with the school. And I think that what this means for college football in the sense of, I don't think he's necessarily a Hall of Fame coach, because I one, he's not at the 600 win percentage, and two, he hasn't necessarily done anything that made him Hall of Fame worthy. But I think he kind of reminds me of the sense of almost like a Jeff Tedford, where I think he's a great ambassador for the game. Every time I've ever heard him in press game conferences, he speaks with passion, he speaks with enthusiasm, and you can tell he really loves the kids and really wants the best for him too. But I think reading between the lines too, you also felt a sense of frustration in the sense of, hey, in order for me to take it to the next level, I'm going to have to completely just revamp exactly what I'm doing in terms of building a program too. And I mean, you can look at this too in the sense of, you can argue that's why Nick Saban stepped down, or you can argue why for shifting a little bit gears to college basketball, Tony Bennett. So same sort of idea too. But in any event, I mean, his legacy with the school, I mean, he's gonna post the highest winning percentage ever in the history of the school. And even to when Wake Forest lost to Louisiana Monroe, Dave Clawson kind of hinted at of, hey, we're at the end of the day, I can only recruit what I'm with the budget that I have. So it kind of that catch-22 of, if you gave Dave Clawson a little and his staff a little bit more money, I would be intrigued in terms of what he can bring there. Because I mean, if you look at his staff too, I mean, Warren Rigiano, who's been his offensive coordinator since the very beginning. And then you look at Brad Lambert, who came over as his defensive coordinator. He was defensive coordinator even under Jim Grobe too, but also he took a stint at Charlotte from 2012 to 2018. And when that didn't work out, he ended up coming back and being the defensive coordinator there. But in terms of this Dave Clawson stepping down, to me, it's just another testament to just the ultimate kind of change in college football. And for kind of the old school fans like me, it definitely is disappointing, because I think I think head coaches like Dave Clawson are great ambassadors of the game. They're great examples of the game. And I think it is nice seeing coaches that still hold on to that sort of traditional mindset too, because if you look at other coaches across the country like James Franklin or Dabo Sweeney or Kirk Ferentz, it's not impossible to win with this sort of model of being able to actually recruit and develop, not just paying players to come from every which way and win. So for me, it's definitely a little bit sad seeing Dave Clawson stepping down, because I think he brings a different element to college football that I don't think a lot of our younger fans necessarily get to see too. And quite frankly, I just think he's great for the game too. And I always kind of ask myself when I'm analyzing these games or I'm analyzing rules or whatever it is, I always try to think to myself, what's best for the game, what's best for the athletes, and what's best for everybody at large too. So definitely a disappointing day, because I would have loved to see what Dave Clawson could do with a little bit with some more NIL resources, and being able to revamp that too. Because at the end of the day, I mean, he is a great ambassador of the game, and it does seem like he's going to stay in an advisory role. And I would probably argue he could possibly be involved with the next head coaching process. I mean, because the thing is too, Wake Forest a little bit late into the game in terms of hiring a head coach. So I kind of asked myself, hey, who are some of the obvious candidates that I think could take over this job? If you would ask me, I think the Demon Deacons really value coaches that have some sort of affiliation with the school. So to me, the most obvious candidates that I would think of that I would say are kind of outside the box that other journalists really aren't throwing out there, I'd say Walter Rigiano, who's been his offensive coordinator ever since he was at Bowling Green. And by the way, just a testament to Dave Clawson, how he's won at program after program after program who have pretty much been the bottom of the barrel. So for them to take him to such as Fordham in 1999, then in 2007, making the FCS championship game at Richmond, and then turning around Bowling Green in 4 to 5 seasons too. It's just incredible to see. But you see, I think of Walter Rugiano, who's been his offensive coordinator since 2009. I think it would be great to see him get an opportunity too, because you can see what he's done with the right resources, with the right quarterbacks too. So I think he would be a great transitional coach in order to, get them going for another couple seasons. And if they want to go ahead and hire someone more long-term in the next, 4 to 5 years, that's great. But I think he would be a phenomenal head coach. I look at Brad Lambert, and I know people are going to push back in the sense of people are going to think about, when he was the first head coach at Charlotte. And if you look at his win-loss record, it's probably in the same vein as Jim Caldwell. However, they've had success under him as defensive coordinator, and I do think he's a solid coach. And again, if you're kind of looking at this perspective as someone who they don't necessarily want to go out and hire someone from the outside, I think he would be another great example of someone who I think you would give a chance to, especially someone who's, I think he's 59 or 60 years old. So you give him that 5 years or so, and I think he would follow a very similar model that Dave Clawson has, because even at Charlotte too, he's used to not having as many resources, and he understands what it's like to recruit within the North Carolina footprint. So I think he'd be another great option. And also another outsider candidate here that I'll throw out there is Neil Brown, because I think he definitely would have been considered for the App State job, and he's getting passed over. But I think he would be another great example too. I think the one thing I would question in terms of Neil Brown is he able to recruit from an academic perspective? Because obviously at West Virginia, it's a little bit more of kind of I guess you can call it, I won't call it a free for all, but it's in that sort of vein to the extent that Neil Brown didn't have as many NIL resources, really had to maximize what he had there. So I think he can possibly be another candidate. And the last name I'll throw out there is Brad White, Kentucky defensive coordinator. Kentucky has low key been one of the better programs in the country defensively, particularly their defensive line. And I know at least for Mark Stoops, Brad White is definitely one of his most trusted coordinators. And also he's an alumni at Wake Forest. He played there from 2004 to 2007 under Jim Grobe. So at least in my opinion, I think that move would make a lot of sense too, especially if you can poach a guy like Brad White from Kentucky. So I would say Riggiano, Lambert, Neil Brown, and Brad White to me would be my big four. 3 out of the 4 have a connection to Wake Forest and understand what the limitations of Wake Forest is, to the extent that it's a unique place in the sense that it's very academically rigorous. You're in a smaller market such as North Carolina, but also you're playing power football too in the ACC, and playing high quality teams every single season. But also too, when you have the model for success that you've seen over the past 30 years too, you know what the program's going to be like. And I think you have a great opportunity of keeping up with a legacy that is pretty strong at Wake Forest.